What's up guys, this is Jordan Nothing Gilbert.
PGL Krakow, the 11th CSGO major, has been and gone, and so I decided I'd do a breakdown video where I go through all 16 teams that played at the major and give you a sense of how I analysed their performance, what went right, what went wrong, depending on where they placed. So we'll start at the top and work our way down. We'll start with the eventual champions, Gambit Gaming. Now, Gambit came in, understandably, as a team that was borderline to even make the top 8. Like, their map pool was still quite uncertain. Like, they had started to establish Inferno and Train, but many people didn't realise how many of those wins come from beating teams that aren't elite-level teams in smaller competitions. Like, no one really cares about the results of CS Summit. SK was the only really top team there. DreamHack Summer, okay, they're beating, like, Cloud9, but before Cloud9 goes on their run, and then they'd had underwhelming performances, such as going out in the Swiss system of Star Series, and in fact actually failing to get out the group at the very same tournament they beat Cloud9 at, which was DreamHack Summer, where they lost to Fnatic, who themselves aren't exactly a world beater right now. So Gambit was a team that looked much like they had kind of had some potential earlier in the year. They were obviously fantastic on Cobble and Overpass. People had figured that out. They'd even been baited into some losses on those maps against CLG by specifically having the map veto slanted so that they'd pick it. An interesting detail to note from how they played in this tournament. And as such, they didn't really have many top wins. Like, their best wins, really, were the ones at DreamHack Austin, where they beat G2 in the semi-finals and Immortals in the final. But that was Immortals, who had FNX. And those were two troubled teams. Immortals on the way down with that lineup. G2 on the way up, but it was still only their second ever tournament with that lineup. So it's hard to really look at Gambit coming into this tournament and say that anyone, realistically, could have said this team could even make top 4, never mind win. Now, part of why they did is they had a pretty easy Swiss system in terms of opponents. Now, yes, they took care of them all, they did well, but in a tournament that had reseeding, they would never be able to get all 3 of these opponents. So they would already have a tougher time getting a top seed for the playoffs, and I think looking at how they played, they would have gotten out, but they would have gotten out in 4 or 5 games, I think, instead of in 3, and as a result, they wouldn't have had the number 1 seed for the playoffs. Now, a key factor that allowed them to win this major is the performance of Mo, the Kazakhstani AWPer. And this, for me, for the whole tournament, was a massive overperformance from him, because I've always categorized him, you'll notice, with players like World Edit, where they're AWPers that dominate tier 2 and do really well there and look fantastic. And you keep thinking every time, right, now let's put them against tier 1, let's put them against really good AWPers and teams, and they never deliver. They very rarely have those big performances. And crucially, in the case of both those names, they're not just like 6 months into their career playing against the top tier. They've played for numerous years now. So this was a big overperformance by Mo, particularly his game in the first map on Overpass against Astralis. Pretty much for me, that was the map that won them the major. Without that map, I think they get 2-0'd by Astralis. Also in the final, he had huge performance, really took over against the double-up setup of Immortals. And that, for me, was a big reason in terms of his fragging. It was a much higher level in big events against Tier 1 than we've ever seen from him in the past. And the funny thing is, it's not like you look at this one performance and say, right, well, he's done it now. You know, he's kind of broken whatever his problems were. He's going to continue on. I'd go ahead and say, no, it won't happen. Like, I think a lot of his issues are stylistic and the fact that I just don't think he's an elite level player. Then you've got to consider he's played for many years and he is 25 years old. He's not a young guy who's still learning how to play the game. He kind of knows how to play the game. This is just who he is as a player. He's a good, above average pro AWPer, but he's not elite tier. And so the fact that they had him performing that well added into the consistent elements of Gambit, which they've always had, which is a Dren playing at a superstar level. Admittedly, in the tournaments in the run-up to this, he'd been a bit off form. And Hobbit, who just plays a very stable level and has a really above, like, I'd say Hobbit, if you want to talk about players in terms of consistency, he's a top 10 player in the world in terms of consistency because he has a high fragging level, not super high, but high for most players at the pro level, and he does it against all opponents and in all tournaments. It's really impressive. So him and Dren always give you firepower, and then you've got the tactics of the Zeus system. The problem always is, do you have that third firepower source when you go against the Astralis, SK, top level teams in the world, even the Fnatics and G2s who have a lot of skill? And usually Gambit doesn't, but Mo turning up big time at this tournament meant they did, and that is a key quality to allow them to win. Then you've got to consider that even the other two players, Dosia and Zeus, had miracle single games. Like, Dosia had like 2 games. He had one against Fnatic on Inferno, and he had one later in the tournament. I think, was it on Train in the final? Then you have Zeus, who had that miraculous train game in Game 3 against Astralis in the semi-final. Obviously, the Astralis series was the most important series of the tournament and was the one that really validated Gambit's major win. Otherwise, it would have been considered a fluke and not that great. But because they were going to play one of SK and Astralis, and because they did beat Astralis, that is a very legit win and really kind of gives their major win some oomph that it wouldn't necessarily have had otherwise if it had just been against lesser competition. So, I think the keys to take away from Gambit beyond the players' performances is that Train and Inferno have established themselves as legitimate strengths right now, particularly, and this is the key element to understand, because they're very good on the T side of those maps. And I want to see going forwards how much that can remain, because at the moment they look like they could contend to be a top 5 team in the world on both of those maps. And if they can, then having Overpass and Cobblestone in their back pocket is still good to pretty good maps. Then considering they've shored up some of the weaknesses Zeus had from his Na'Vi days, where he didn't want to play Cash, didn't want to play Nuke, but now they will play those to ban Mirage. Actually, they've got a pretty good map pool. They've got a good tactical system. I don't think Mo's going to be there, but they've got a Dren, they've got Hobbit. I personally think they should make a roster move. I think they should get like a Seized for Dosia, or they should have tried to get Guardian instead of Mo. They won't do that because they've just won the major and they obviously believe in their system. But I think the pieces they have mean they could be a really consistent, like 6th or 5th best team in the world now. The problem is I don't see them winning tournaments or going to top 4 very often, but I think they've now got the consistency and the solid nature where you could expect them to get it to the playoffs and then to win a series and then to face an SK and Astralis, and typically in other scenarios to lose, because you're not going to have Mo dropping 30 plus kills on Overpass like he did against Astralis very often at all. But let's move on. Runners up, Immortals. This is easily the weakest run to a second place finish, a runner-up finish I've ever seen in the history of the majors, by far. I mean, this is a team that almost didn't make the major. They were touch and go to even qualify. Then look at the major. They beat Vega, Na'Vi, and Flipside in the Swiss system, right? Only Na'Vi of those teams is considered good, and even then they're very streaky and they don't always get the best out of their individual players. Big is the team they played in the quarterfinals, who'd only played one map, had the jump bug boost, and had a bit of an overperformance, I think, from Nex, and they beat them, I wouldn't say easily, because they did lose the first map, but they beat them fairly convincingly. I didn't think Big was that great, to be honest. Then they beat Virtus.pro, the team that gave them the legitimacy, but Virtus.pro was in a bad slump themselves and hadn't looked that good in the tournament anyway. Then they get to the final, they win one map against Gambit. The map Gambit hasn't even played all tournament and is classically Immortals' best, and then they lose to Gambit. So I have to look at this run and say, what a weak run. Like, where are the good games here? Like, you beat Virtus.pro, but they're merely name value. Otherwise, you're not really playing really good teams here and beating them. There's not any teams here that are even ranked top 10, basically. Gambit is the only one. Gambit and Na'Vi. Na'Vi, you played in a best of 1. You only won one map off Gambit and lost 2 to them. So, pretty weak run all in all. Now, they have a streaky style that's only become exacerbated by KNG joining, and they rode that streaky style. It's inconsistent, but when it worked, it allowed them to go this far. You're on the double up set up with Henny and KNG. Henny continues to underwhelm against Tier 1. I also just don't buy that guy as an elite opener, never have, quite frankly. I think he's actually quite woeful at the Tier 1 level. He just has occasional games where he's very good, but the reason why his stats average out to not to be that great is because for all the great games, he has very poor games where he gets like 11 kills. Yet he has the AWP in his hand 24/7. I actually think a flaw in this Immortals team is that they make Henny the primary AWP over KNG. I'd make KNG the primary AWP and then have Henny secondary AWP. Now, I realise why they don't do that. Henny's been in the team forever. His brother's in the team. And also, he's not that sick a rifler. So again, you'd almost be arguing against him being in the team. Now, KNG was strong. He has been a revelation since he's been picked up. DreamHack Summer in this tournament, he looked very good. Yes, he had some other tournaments where he wasn't that sick. But all in all, he looks like a very solid addition to that team, especially because his style of play is bolstering their streaky style of play anyway. And he actually has some level of stability to his game. I think Steel overperforming at this tournament was playing a role in how far they went. But I have noticed that he has been on the gradual rise ever since the in-game leader role went over to Bolts, which I'm informed is who the in-game leader is now. And Bolts has always been a solid player, so he does a decent job as kind of your 5th man in the in-game leader. I think Steel, it's worth noting, remember, he used to play in Keyed Stars in Luminosity back before they had those sick players. And actually, I think this guy looks way better now than he ever did then. He really, as an in-game leader, he was okay. He at least made some kind of plays on the map. I feel like he's really improved his level, and he had a pretty good performance at this tournament. Lucas had overall, I mean, I don't think he's a very good player in general, but he's usually more of a supportive player. He had an okay tournament. It's normally what you'd expect from him, but he was godlike against Virtus.pro, and that was the key win that really gave them a chance to go to the final of this major. Okay, 3rd place team, Astralis. Now, first of all, after they beat SK, which was an incredible match, one of the toughest that they've faced in a long time, even though SK didn't play up to form on the second map, This was an example of where Astralis should have won the major after that game. That they didn't shows that they had their own problems, their own flaws at this tournament, because that SK series was a fantastic game. Particularly what won them the series was the cash game. They were always favourites on Overpass, but winning cash in close fashion and with that great performance by Device and then the good T-side strats, some of the interesting calls mid-round, this was really what allowed them to get through that series. Yes, Device had sick AWPing, he shut down Fallen. I thought it was an interesting point that Stuchu made, that in shutting down Fallen, that actually neutralizes Fur to some extent, because he is a player who relies on Fallen for some follow-up and for some cover in certain areas where he's going to push around a corner. And if you don't have Fallen, it slows down his T-side, and he's obviously been one of the most dominant players of the year so far, has Fur. Now, a point that I made before the game in my preview video is one that actually held up in the match, which is that if you look at when they've played series with this Astralis lineup against any version of SK in actual best-of-3 series, Device always does well, Fallen does okay, sometimes not that well, coldzera does poorly, which continued here, and Fur is the key. So actually being able to shut down Fallen, which helps shut down Fur, is a massive element in these matches that Astralis has been able to win or have very close performances against SK in best-of-3s. We're not talking about best-of-1s. Now, in this tournament, the best player overall, here's the thing. In terms of impact, yeah, it might have been Device because he had that monster series against SK. But you look top to bottom through the whole tournament, I'd actually say it was dupreeh. And I've noticed ever since Katowice, where he really started to settle into that lurk role, he's become a fantastic player again, but from a totally different perspective of the game from when he was an entry fragger for all those years. He's a really strong rifler, his deagle is back on form, and he just looks like he has the confidence now to feel comfortable with where he's playing, and he's become very strong. In fact, it was Gambit, and Zeus particularly, breaking through against him in that ladder room on train that allowed Gambit to win the game because dupreeh was so strong from that position in the game and in the tournament. Now, Device obviously was very strong against SK. That was one of the best performances in a best-of-3 at a major we've ever seen. For the tournament, he was still pretty good. He's still a very good player. He's not hitting those superstar levels that he was sometimes earlier this year and late last year, but he's still a very good player, clearly a top 10 player in the world. He had a bit of a letdown in the semi-finals, but we heard the stories that apparently he had some personal losses coming into this tournament. Now, the saddest part of Astralis' run here was Kirby was pretty poor at this tournament. He had like the odd few kills because he has that streaky style on entry that were good, but his overall performances at the tournament nowhere close to where they were earlier this year. In fact, funnily enough, as dupreeh's gone up for Katowice, Kirby's going down, and it looks to me like he's having some sort of issues with his role. Like, what oftentimes when you put a player like him in a new role, initially they're embracing all the aspects that are good from it, it's working out for them, and other teams have to adapt to how to play them. I feel like a lot of teams have kind of got a sense now for how Kirby's going to play, but part of that goes on Glaive as well. Glaive's also been pretty terrible the last couple of months, and Glaive is also an entry component in that particular sense, and so it really makes you wonder at this point in time what's going on with the entry side of the equation, because the more defensive side of the equation, Device and dupreeh and then Zipmix in the middle somewhere, they're all killing it. They're doing really well, and the style's still working from Astralis, but the entry side is a real issue right now. Now, overall for Astralis, yes, it's underwhelming they didn't win the major because they beat SK, but then again, from the bracket draw, they could have gone out round of 8. I think this all in all was a good tournament from them, but it will be considered a missed opportunity. If they were going to be like a top 5 team of all time, they probably should have won this major, quite frankly. Virtus.pro also finished top 4. I think their run was entirely underwhelming. I mean, look who they beat in Swiss system. Vega, Fnatic, and C9. Right, okay, Vega, yeah, free win right there. Fnatic, decent enough team. C9, again, decent enough team. Like, those are all right teams, but you haven't done anything special yet. Then you get North in the round of 8. I think that's one of the better opponents you could get at that point in time, even though there were a lot of upset teams there. Also, traditionally, VP's nearly always managed to beat North in those big series. I think MSL did a classic Exist-style veto, which helped VP and gave them their best maps, basically. And then you had that rare sighting that you occasionally get, like 1 in every 5 tournaments, but when it happens, you win the game from it, which is just as Apex on G2. If he has a monster series, like 50 kills over 2 maps, you just win the series outright. The same exists with Bialy, and he had one of those rare series where he smashed it. Now, I still think he's absolutely one of the players who should be on the chopping block, and really is someone where I feel like you could get a star player in his place who'd be more consistent. Still, he had a huge series that won you this one. When they got to play Immortals, they got thrashed. Like, first of all, the maps, I don't know what they were thinking, letting Inferno Mirage be the maps for the series. Don't think that made a lot of sense considering what Immortals like to do. You know Immortals is a streaky team who like to play off their comfort, so make them go to the maps they don't like as much. I also think as soon as Astralis lost to Gambit in the other semi-final, VP were then the favourites to win the major, so they fucked up and underwhelmed by not winning this match and getting to the final. Finally, you got to look at the player strength. Pasha was good and has been good for a few months now. Bialy had a good event, but is very up and down over the tournaments and generally more down than up. Snacks was very underwhelming. He's nowhere near the impact he was at before. And Taz has dropped off a cliff this year. He was so good late last year. He was having amazing numbers. His fragging was very high level. He was a big game player. He has been terrible this year. And him combined with Snacks is killing this team for me because Snacks and Taz in many ways define the modern style of Virtus.pro. Like Taz can be that key entry player or that bold player on maps like Train and CT Inner. He has been very underwhelming and just been a free killer many times here. And Snacks is supposed to be that guy who does the VP big ball style play that win you those key moments in rounds when a slow setup from the opponent would execute if he doesn't pull it off. And he hasn't been able to do that for a long time now. So Virtus.pro, I still think they're in their slump. This didn't change that much for me because they didn't meet that many good teams. Okay, so Fnatic. First of all, it's a great sign that JW is back to a level of form I haven't seen since late 2014, when he really was that special player. He was the wonder child, he could do whatever he wanted, and his plays were killers. They really did disrupt the opponent and make them have to second guess themselves. He's doing that at the moment, and Olaf's at a pretty good level. Their problem is the rest of them are really suffering. Crimson and Flusher are absolutely in the toilet right now. I've never seen them play so poorly, especially because normally they're players who you marvel at their consistency and the fact that they win clutches, etc. And generally, they're just not playing up to form, and they didn't at this major. Fnatic's still a good team, but they have to get teams that just go toe-to-toe with them and try to bang it out skill-wise. So if they played a G2, yes, that could be a great best-of-3. Playing teams like a Gambit or Astralis, it's just not going to work out for them. These are bad stylistic matchups. So they're an alright team, but they're nowhere near top 5. SK Gaming, they're still the best team in the world. They're still the team I'd take tomorrow to win any tournament. I don't think there was a problem at this tournament itself. I do think that a lot of the issues that happened against Astralis have historically happened against Astralis if you go and look. I still think SK is a favourite to win against everyone, including maybe even Astralis. So I don't really blame them for this one. The bracket draw really kind of screwed them here. I think they would have won the major if they'd beaten Astralis. Not too much to say about that one. So Big was a massive surprise to make the playoffs. I didn't even know if they'd make the major itself. They have a good system in place. I like their tactics. I think Godby's done a fantastic job mapping out his different maps that he plays. And as a result, they can play maps that they were weaker on before and do very well. Getting to play one map the whole time during the Swiss system helped, but it wasn't necessarily their best maps. I don't blame people for letting it through. Yes, they had the jump boost, which I think which I think probably got them a few extra rounds a game, but they would have won most of those games anyway. The big issue for me with Big is, I told you, Nex doesn't perform at tier 1. It just doesn't happen. But this time he did. Right up until the playoffs, he was having a really good performance. Almost at the level you'd always hoped he would with the old Mouse Sports lineups, with Godby and then with Nico later, and with Big now. So that's very encouraging if that can continue. With that said, he is so consistently underwhelmed in that respect that I want to see a few more tournaments before I can put my stock in that. So I feel like Big had an overperformance here ultimately. Not too much other to say than that. Tabson is a beast right now. He's a pretty good player. Overall, the system seems to work well and makes people like Legia and like Key have a place within the team, even though I don't think they're that good. And I have to say, props to Legia. He did actually play pretty well at certain times in this tournament, including actually against Immortals in the Elimination Series. Now, the other team that made the top 8 was North. I think they're a train wreck of a team right now because I think they're just so mismanaged. Like, I think Config should be the entry fragger. He is by far their best player. His skills are incredible right now. He had another strong tournament here, but he shit the bed in the series against VP. Cajun, it continues to be a very solid player, a very good player, and if he was your third best player, this would be a very dangerous team again, like they were in October of 2016. But he's not. At the moment, he's clearly the second best player in the team, and that's what's showing that they don't have quite enough firepower, they don't have quite enough tactics, they don't have quite enough of anything to North. They've got a little bit of everything and not enough of one thing to have a style that's enduring and stands out beyond other people. So they are a poor man's team compared to every other style of opponent. Magisk has been very underwhelming. I can understand why they're considering cutting him. The last few months have been terrible. In fact, most of 2017 hasn't been great, quite frankly. And his disappearance has really been what's cost his team, along with swapping Config to the lurk role and putting AZ as the entry fragger, who's been a very underwhelming fragger, and he's supposed to be your entry fragger. So I think North is just a team that are just very mediocre all around when you contrast them against the elite teams, and they're not good enough at any one thing to beat any elite team in a best of 3. So this is actually a reasonable placing for them. It wasn't that terrible. Now, the teams that didn't make the playoffs, so we've got 8 of them, obviously. Cloud9, yes, they're a decent team. Yes, they have a high ceiling at times, but they've really leveled off. They haven't won big best-of-3 series over any top teams recently, so their run wasn't as legitimate as people thought it was. Then you've got to consider that this, just to me, was what you'd expect to happen. They had all those good games. Now they've had some bad games. They've leveled off to about what they should be, which is like bottom end of the top 10, but still a decent enough team. I think they need a roster move. They need a real game leader. Then you'll really unleash those players. At the moment, they've shown us they're only really world-class on Mirage, maybe Train. These are the really strong maps. Cobble and Cash, they're just opponent dependent on whatever streak Cloud9's on. So the map pool's not as strong as people think. Automatic had a very sick tournament. Stewie had a decent tournament, but at least he has impact. His frags weren't that great overall. G2. Now, first and foremost, G2 relies on Kenny S being a superstar, a top 5 player in the world, and he wasn't at this tournament, which was sad. He really underperformed overall. Body actually massively fell off a cliff as well. He hasn't done that well at majors as it is. Obviously, he's a young player, but he'd been one of the better fraggers for the team. Their map pool fell apart in the playoffs. They really didn't end up with that many maps that could consistently work for them, whereas they looked like they'd built up that solid 4 to 5 beforehand. So underwhelming tournament for them. They've got a lot to rethink. I think their style's still good. I think they still have good players, but you're not going to be able to survive if Kenny S gets neutralized or just himself underperforms. Flip side, the good side for Flip side was this. They beat FaZe. That's a massive performance. Electronic was very good, but they're almost certainly going to lose him. That's about it. Flip side, they made the major. Congrats. They won a map against FaZe here. Congrats again. That's about it. You can't expect much more. They're like a worse version of Big in some respects, and they have less of a ceiling than Big even. So I feel like this is where they should have finished. Na'Vi was obviously very underwhelming just because of the names, but that's always been the story with Na'Vi. They still don't have the good in-game leadership, so they can get a lot of rounds, but they can't close any games. Simple was fucking fantastic at this tournament. He was legitimately one of the 5 best players at the tournament, but his team got banged out 1-3 regardless. They lost on Overpass and Mirage, which are basically their best maps. So you can see that this was the low end of what's possible for Na'Vi. We've seen the best that they have, where they go top 4 Cologne, but then you see the bad sides of them as well. Both sides still present, and I'm glad they are making roster moves because there's so much talent in their team that could be better used. Mouse Sports were good, but underwhelming a little bit. They had strong opponents they played against. Their problem is, like, they still haven't narrowed down maps that they're legitimately world-class on. Oscar plays well. Some of the others have been up and down. I think they probably do need a 1 or 2 roster moves. Personally, I'd like to see them move towards a proper in-game leader, but that's a story for a lot of teams right now. I just feel like the Chris J era has kind of gone for me, but it seems like Dennis and Lowell are the ones they're going to replace. Lowell, I don't mind. I'm not so much. Dennis, definitely great move to replace him. I feel like Mouse is a team with a lot of potential in the future. Rops is clearly developing still. Oscar's a beast. It's got a lot of pieces here, and this was a fine first kind of outing for this lineup at the major. Penta, okay, I thought they had a chance to get some upsets, but ultimately the problem is individually they didn't show up. Like, Sonny was a beast. I told you that guy will play against anyone at a high level because he's got a really good overall style to his play as well as his skills. But HS was the player at the qualifier who went mental, and as you'd expect from that being a one-off over performance, fell right off a cliff back to normal and was actually, when he got against tier 1, fairly underwhelming. Innocent struggled, hasn't been at a great performance for a while. Zen bizarrely overperformed. I don't know why. I thought he's been one of the worst players in the team. And then Crystal's the in-game leader, and it's not particularly good. And as a result, I hope they don't make him up too much. So Penta didn't have the individual performances, which massively were what powered their squad. And as a result, they just ended up with a mediocre to bad placing. FaZe were obviously the biggest shock of the tournament because they are a team where I still can't believe they didn't get out of the Swiss system. Fuck that. I can't even believe they didn't get a map win because you look at the talent in their team and how fantastically consistent their performances have been in the last 4 months. You'd think this team would be making the semis at least. Nico was good, but it's worth pointing out was not at the superstar top 3 player in the world level he normally is every tournament. Rain was underwhelming except that one map that everyone remembers. Kiyoshima and Carrigan, I thought were absolute shit. Kiyo's been such a clutch player recently. None of that was there. Carrigan's fragging was non-existent. Aloe did fine. So this was a team where the entire team looked in disarray. It's very rare you have every aspect breakdown like that. That tells me there's something going on outside of the team, and it's no surprise there's rumors they're going to make roster moves. The final team is Vega Squadron. I thought they were the worst team at the major. They were the worst team at the major. They were free wins. They in no way consolidated the idea the CIS minor is actually any good. They barely got into this tournament. They have one redeeming factor. His name is Mir, and a lot of rumors suggest he will be leaving this team and going elsewhere, at which point we can all forget about Vega Squadron again. Now then, one last thing that we can do is I actually ran with EsportPools, my sponsor, a fantasy pool for this tournament. And in it, I'll show you where I placed and the players I had, and then I'll show you who won the pool itself. Okay, so here we are. We're on EsportPools, and I'm going to go up to... Whereabouts am I going here? Fantasy pools, past. There we go. Thorin's exclusive major pool. It was the one where it had like $500 worth of skins in, you might remember. First place was a Bayonet Fade. And it had almost 5,000 entries, and I actually finished 51st in it. And here's the bizarre part of why I finished 51st, is if you remember my team I made, Cold Zero and Cold I picked because there's a very good chance they were going to the final, if not won the tournament, and they're both so consistently good. So they both gave me big numbers. I then also picked Henny and KNG because they were cheaper players, but I thought Immortals, they're a streaky team. If they go far, then I can actually get a lot of points, which ended up being what happened. In fact, sadly, because SK didn't win their series, I probably could have won my own fucking pool if SK had just made the final from their side of the bracket. Didn't happen, but Henny and KNG got me good points. I had Body there because he'd been so good in the run-up to this tournament. G2 had a chance to make playoffs. He obviously didn't do very well here. He did badly individually, and G2 did badly. So I came 51st, but let's look at the leaderboard. So Augie was the ultimate winner. And he actually won from the tiebreaker, by the way. Look, he put 29 seconds for that. And then Dubloid, who, by the way, was in a tiebreaker to win first place, put a really stupid answer of 2,000. I don't know if that was an accident, but in doing so, lost himself the tiebreaker. So always put something reasonable for the tiebreaker, which is usually something like how many seconds will pass until the first kill happens in some scenario. I can't remember. So it's never going to be 2,000, is it? So he blew that himself. Now let's look at his team. Look, he actually had 3 other players I did. He had Cold and Fur. Again, it was so obvious that SK should go to the final, except in ridiculous circumstances like this. Now, picking Cold and Fur, incredibly stable players. Almost everyone in my top X did that. Look, it's all Cold and Fur the whole fucking way. Because, that guy had Fallen and Cold. But it's because they were so ridiculously good. I can understand it, right? Now, KNG, again, I had him as well. He also went with the logic that Immortals players are cheap, but they're streaky. Maybe they go on a run. That did work out. He picked KNG and Steel. Steel obviously overperformed quite a lot. And then he got Zipnix as well. Now, Zipnix did okay in terms of numbers, but that's only because Astralis went to the semis. Ultimately, that's not that great a pick overall. If he couldn't have known this. He obviously wish he could have had a Gambit player who would have been quite cheap as well. But again, that's not what we're working on as a premise. So congrats to Augie for winning that. And as such, winning this Bayonet Fade Factory New. I'm sure for future tournaments, we'll be running these contests on EsportPools. This one was free to enter, but it had $500 worth of skins to be won for people who entered.
Hello, this is Neo, just an average CSGO player, and you're watching Thorin's YouTube channel.